Welcome everybody to whatever this is, about the 35th or so, one of these sessions we've done since the beginning of January, which is wonderful, our ABT crew, and got a bunch of little things for us to chew on here today to generate some of the conversation, discussion, a variety of different folks jumping in. This is the major centerpiece here. Liz is going to give us a quick little talk, Liz and Eric, about this project they're doing on the metrics with Faulkner and Crichton. But a couple little tidbits here at the start. You heard me talk about this a few weeks ago. At the center of everything we teach with the ABT framework is the power and importance of the singular narrative. And the Nicholas Kristof article from 2009, where he really goes through it in great detail about as soon as you go from one message to two, you start diluting the audience down. And I whined about this for the Democratic Party. Every night, Rachel Maddow gets on there and shows proudly all the demonstrations where every single sign is different. And nobody seems to have any instincts about you're not getting a message when you've got 250 different messages on all your signs. You've got to unify around a singular theme. And fortunately, one individual, what's his name, Ezra Levin, at the beginning of the year started to get some momentum around this one theme, no kings. And this a few nights ago on Rachel Maddow, she put this number up there that is just showing finally they've got a message there. They've got a singular narrative to rally around. Don't know that it's a dream statement, no kings, but at least it's something that they can all just shut up and unify around so they can possibly take on the opposition because you're never going to win if you don't manage to get something that can go head to head with them. And what this stat is showing is that they're beating them. By the way, a little side note here, just to show you what my miserable narrative nerd life is like. I just got to share this. Every morning when I go to the local grocery store, they've got the New York Times there, and I usually don't buy it, but I always pick it up and look at the front page because this is the ultimate incubator of ABT structure. I noticed this 10 years ago and began quantifying it. And what I do is go through looking for but paragraphs, paragraphs that start with the word but. Everybody from my generation, we were taught to never start a sentence with the word but, much less a paragraph. But that has changed over times. And one friend of mine is a writer at the New York Times, sent me a few years ago the guidelines of the New York Times where they address that. And they say, we don't worry about that anymore. It's now okay to not only start a sentence with the word but even paragraphs. And you'll see it on the front page. And I pick it up and I count the number of but paragraphs. So this is yesterday's paper that I managed to get. And here's but number one right there. There's the first but that starts a paragraph. And the average is two but paragraphs per paper on the front page. And for yesterday, it was above the average because over here's another one. There's a second but paragraph over there. And then down in the bottom half of the fold, there's a third but paragraph right there. And so that's my miserable life at the grocery store every morning, looking at that, picking up the newspaper, everybody wondering, why is he staring at that thing? And me counting the number of but paragraphs. But it really is significant because if you look more closely at the structure there, you'll see the ABT structure right there. The first paragraph, here's this one. Justices grapple with tariffs under President's Eiffel Watch. Starts off, it says, again and again, since President Trump returned to the White House, the Supreme Court's conservative majority has blessed his boundary pushing policies, allowing them to take effect on an interim basis. Some litigation plays out in the lower courts. But on Wednesday, there it is, setup and the turn. ABT structure. I've talked to reporters at the New York Times about this. They have no interest in it. Do you realize every day you are embodying ABT structure on your front page because you're the ultimate incubator of trying to reach a mass audience, and you need to have, in the same way that movies need to have, this really refined ABT structure. And they could not care less about that. But anyhow, such is my nerdy life. Now, along those same lines, in this group, we have lots of people who are now have developed deep narrative intuition and sensitivity to the ABT structure, and they hear it and they see it all over the place. And so, Doug, you want to walk us through what you sent me an email about last week where your alarm bells went off?
Well, I was pleased to know that that little commercial that Canada did about tariffs was pissed off the administration so badly. But I was curious as to know, like, what besides the fact that they hold this former president usually in high regard, what about it made them so mad to the point where they even said it was fake? And the answer was very clear. It was just a near perfect ABT. It just punched you right in the face with, the problem about tariffs and just very clearly communicated, which I think was, one of his great strengths, Reagan. He was a very good communicator.
Can you read that on your screen there? Read it to us.
Yeah, he says when someone says let's impose tariffs on foreign imports, it looks like they're doing the patriotic thing by protecting American products and jobs. And sometimes for a short while it works, but only for a short time. But over the long, he does two buts. But over the long run, such trade barriers hurt every American worker and consumer. So the because is implied, but it's definitely there. Because high tariffs inevitably lead to retaliation by foreign countries and the triggering of fierce trade wars. And then he does the Park Howell amplify the pain right there, doesn't he?
Nice.
Like, because not only that, but then the worst happens. Market shrinking collapse. You're going to ruin the whole freaking economy, dude. Businesses and industries shut down and millions of people lose their jobs. Therefore, and he didn't say that, but that's parentheses, the way to prosperity for all nations is rejecting protectionist legislation and promoting fair and free competition. How's that? Good ABT, yeah?
That's perfect, Dave. Is that what the sample was that they had in that commercial? That was the whole
Uh-huh.
deal.
Yeah,
And
that was verbatim. I
yeah, isn't
just
that
added
amazing?
the couple of the because and the therefore.
Yeah, it's not a coincidence. That's your basic structure there. Okay, which then segues into tiny bit more politics here that I just thought everybody'd find kind of interesting after Mondami's fairly intense speech last night. The transcript went up in the New York Times almost immediately, and so I went to work on that. As everybody, ought to do more and more. Matthew put the link in there of the ABT-ometer, thanks to my good buddy Alistair Trotter, who put together using Claude, the very simple version now that is finally, over the years, we had like 4 or 5 different people tried to make versions of this. And I think Claude really gave the really good breakthrough now where it's a simple tool that lots of people are using it. And Liz is going to be talking about it in a minute here with her whole segment. But here's what you got with Mondami was toss the whole thing in there. You can see it was 2,293 words total. There's the ands and but count. Look, first off, look at the and frequency. That's a bullseye. In fact, Matthew, we need to tweak that label there. It should say more than good. It should just say really bullseye when you land exactly on this optimum for which there's a body of literature that shows that it's called the academic optimum in the Longman study. But it means I don't know, we still don't know exactly what it means, but what we know is that when you fall way below it and you get down below 2, you're not doing enough setup, enough exposition. You're just blowing through a whole bunch of contradiction, making this point, this point, this point. And it may feel like fierce rhetoric, but it's not working at a very deep level. When you get to that too high, over 3.3%, up to 4%, up to 5%, up to 6%, getting up into the World Bank and government reports area where there's so many ands, it becomes unreadable. You can't follow a stream of thought because it's just blah, 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 blah. So what we see with him is the absolute bullseye on the 2.5%. And I think that that's reflected. You could feel as he was giving that speech, everything was very clearly thought out and very efficiently delivered. Every word had been scrutinized. That's a lot of what the and frequency, I think, reflects is that kind of scrutiny. And then his narrative index at a 14, that's not blazing. That's not up in the 30s the way that Madman Trump tends to be. It's not even in the low 20s as some of the great orators of Lincoln and Kennedy and MLK Jr. and others tend to be in the low 20s, upper teens. But it's kind of right in the middle of politicians. Now, I think there was an emotional element and content to what he was delivering there that a lot of the commentators talked about. And there's content elements to it as well of what he was saying. And the commentators on CNN all kind of labeled it a rookie effort, saying that it was good, but it wasn't that, I don't know, on and on. You can discuss that among yourselves. But anyhow, that's your basic metrics that came through on that. And then here's the plot of it. And you can see our little optimum green square there. It was just out of that because of the lower narrative index. But that said, that gives you a little bit of an insight on him. And then a couple of excerpts from that. Interestingly, this got a lot of commentary, as if you watched anything, them talking afterwards. His opening 2 sentences. Thank you, my friends. the sun may have set over our city this evening, but as Eugene Debs once said, I can see the dawn of a better day for humanity. That was very provocative to quote Eugene Debs, who I did not know who he was. I had to Wikipedia him and study up on the fact that he was a great socialist in the 1800s. And yeah, a lot of people were flustered over him quoting that as the opening line. Um, and then this other thing, this is a little bit of just showing you the power of the word but. And notice he did not say, however. I wish Andrew Cuomo only the best in private life, but let tonight be the final time. That is really taking out the club right there to bonk his opponent over the head and be done with him. Let it be the final time I utter his name as we turn the page of, go away. Again, that's a major piece of strategy there. The difference between but and however there. Now, think that through how that would have played if he'd say, however, let tonight be the first. No, it was but. There's your drama at work. Okay. And on that note, then, this leads to Liz, are you ready to take over? This is our little demo thing. And where this comes from is applying the metrics to I've been developing this for really 10 years, looking at these two metrics more and more and more. And I guarantee you, I sent one friend a note last night about give this stuff time, and it's going to do, I think, for speechifying what sabermetrics has done to baseball, which is, I don't know if it'll come from my work here, our work with all this sort of stuff, but it's inevitable that they're going to work out really robust metrics where every speech by the next morning will have been run through the chopper to look at what were the metrics on that speech last night. In the same way you look at baseball batting averages and everything else from the World Series game last night, what was the exit velocity of all the home runs that were hit? We're in this metrics-driven world where everybody wants to analyze everything. I'm not a fan of that, but that said, you can't ignore these two metrics, which I think the more we work with them, the more we're going in the same direction of seeing they're not super precise, but they're pretty accurate and really to the point where nowadays we're talking about the idea of seeing it as sort of a fingerprint for any given voice that especially with different novelists there are clear differences in their styles and these metrics I think can capture some of that and that's what this little case study is. So where this originates from, the thanks go to Dr. Eric Stengler from State University in New York at Oneonta. I hope that's the name of your university. And Eric's been a member of our group all this year. And then I came up with this idea of working with Liz to apply the metrics to some authors, and this is where it's evolved to. So, Liz, on that note, I will stop sharing. You can take it from there, and let's see where we go.
I think you're muted, Liz.
I flipped the switch on my microphone yet again
There
because
you
that's
go.
what I do. Yeah, so the project we've been working on, we talking about how you quantify narrative strength and kind of
Yeah.
started from the
And
uh,
let's see, this is going to lead to actually, why don't we start with Eric? Can you say just a couple sentences of this poster that the two of you are putting together, and where are you going to be presenting that?
Yes, so this poster is going to be presented next week. Basically, exactly a week from now, I'll be presenting it. And yeah, it's going to be at the showcase conference in our university, where faculty show what we are working on. And yeah, it will be over 2 days, Wednesday and Thursday.
Nice. Okay. And just a couple words of history on that. 10 years ago, when I first started doing these metrics, I had a friend. There's a publication called The Conversation for the academic world, and it's pretty big and broad. And I had a friend in Australia who was friends with an editor there. And back then, I had put together the metrics for Hillary versus Trump and had a very clear pattern there. And he said, write it up, write it up. I'll get it into the conversation for you with my friend. And I foolishly took the bait, wrote it up, sent it in there, and she and two other editors just made a mess out of it, chopped it all up. We've never seen this before. We don't know what this is, blah, blah, blah. And that was the end of that for me. I should have known better from my academic days of what peer review does to these things and what editors do. So I quit on pursuing that direction. I've done what we've done for 10 years, which is self-publishing these books and building this whole training program, which is all fine. But that said, it's time now that we're gathering enough momentum around this, enough of a database that this is really great that you'll do this thing next week, and then I'll be pushing you guys to take it further. So, okay, sorry, that's some of the setup. So, yeah, Liz, take it away.
Perfect. All right. Yep. And this is exactly pretty much what our poster is. So, all right. So we're talking about quantifying narrative strength. I'm on the right button here. There we go. Okay. So we started with the question of if you have a piece of text, is it more artsy or more powerful? So is it more descriptive or is it more action driven, high action? And for this, we're looking at what Randy coined the narrative fingerprint. So our and frequency and our narrative index. Reminder that the and frequency is the total number of ands in the text divided by the total number of words in the text, whereas our narrative index is the total number of buts divided by the total number of ands times 100. So, and this is really what we're looking at. So we looked at two authors, Michael Crichton and William Faulkner, two very, very different authors. These are the texts we looked at for them. And what we found was really, when you compare it on the chart of narrative index versus and frequency, Faulkner really shows up. Oh, sorry. Crichton shows up kind of dead center. He's pretty much right on. He almost I think he averages something like a 2.4 something on his and frequency, if I remember correctly. And then his narrative index is pretty much 25 or higher. If he comes in a
And
little bit
let's
lower,
take a moment to soak that in, the narrative
yeah,
index, because that's really high. And in fact, he gave several speeches, one of which was to the American Association of Advancement of Science, which was organized by a good friend of ours who is he here with us?
he is. He is.
Liz's dad, Mike Strauss. And that speech, I think, is a 35 or so. And the bottom line is that, again, fingerprint in all of Crichton's writings, he's always way up there in 25 to 35 to almost 40 for his narrative index. And then pretty low. What are we at there? We're below 2.5. And on some of his things, his speeches are below 2.0,
Yeah.
which means is really kind of action driven. Okay. And now
Mm-hmm.
keep her
Yeah.
going.
And in his case, also, as you mentioned his speech, Randy, this is regardless of whether he's writing fiction or nonfiction, too.
Yes. Yeah. Good point.
So,
Exactly.
and then on the other side, we looked at William Faulkner, who I will completely confess now, I've never read a single piece of William Faulkner, but he consistently shows up in a higher and frequency and a lower narrative index. He tends to ride right in the teens. The Reavers scored 20 on the narrative index, and he pretty much scores 3 or higher on and frequency. So when you really see them, they're both, and this really, from what we've looked at, it really is consistently where they're falling. Crichton falls right there in that optimum zone or a little higher, whereas Faulkner really sits in that lower right quadrant.
And let's say a few more words there about the and frequency. So he's over 3, and in fact Hemingway gets all the way up to 4.0 for his and frequency. Remember Tolkien a few weeks ago, we were talking about him. His and frequency is way up there. And it seems like a pretty clear divide that basically writers who are really great with the more artistic side of things, of building worlds, all of that exposition and setup involves a lot of use of the word and then an action writer like Crichton, that was one of his weaknesses, that he was legendary for. People called all of his characters stick figures. He just didn't have any interest in description. He loved putting in lots of science, but not in a descriptive way, and as a result he just kind of dispensed of the word and largely in his structure.
Definitely. And even as I'm going through and doing the metrics, the bits and pieces of like words here and there, Crichton's, it was action, action, action. Faulkner was a lot of description, introspection. That's kind of what I was just seeing as I went through all of these numbers. So, again, we have Crichton right here sitting in the optimum or a little higher, and Faulkner sitting here in the lower point. Crichton, we know him for being high action, and he's a high narrative index, low and frequency, really optimum and frequency. Whereas Faulkner, we know for his description, his prose. Even I know that, and I haven't read any Faulkner, but I still know that about him. And he,
And let me add in a couple more words of part of why we chose William Faulkner was because of my good friend Patricia Hill, who's here, part of this group, and we had lunch a month or so ago, and she grew up in his hometown of Oxford, Mississippi, and began telling me some tales from her childhood of overlapping with him. And again, same thing for me. Don't know that I've read a lot of Faulkner books, but it didn't keep me from condescending to Liz when she conceded that she hadn't read any Faulkner either. But so, all right, we're not literary scholars. But that was the origin of choosing Faulkner. But as soon as she began to look at the metrics, that pattern came out very clearly. And that's kind of the starting point here is we've done lots more values for other authors, but this is a really good kind of beginning case study of
Yeah.
two that are distinctively different. And yeah, Eric, you want to join in with anything?
Yeah, I wanted to add that we are, I mean, as Liz said, we are going to go through all of Crichton works. And other than those 4 dots that we've displayed on the poster, we have already tested a few other works by him. And one of the things that I wanted to look at early on was whether he improved over time. So comparing his older writings with the more recent or the latest writings, and we cannot conclusively say anything yet, but it looks like that's the case. That's the very early writings, even the very first article he wrote as a kid that was published in the New York Times of all places, was ranked good in our metrics, but not as good as his latest works. So yeah, it's a
That's
very
really interesting. Okay, let's see. Hang on one second, and maybe you can stop sharing at this point, Liz. We'll start having just general discussion. And one thing to toss in is that there are just a whole stack of in the academic world, there are entire departments of narrative studies and all these professors and academics, and they're trying to do a bunch of this sort of work, looking at quantification of literature and things of that sort. But they come up with these massively multivariable models that are so complicated and intricate that they're just not broadly applicable. And they try to incorporate 18 different variables of narrative quality, and you just get so much noise going on there. This is the opposite direction, which is out of simplicity, you can arrive. It's basically the kind of chaos theory dynamic of out of simplicity can arise complexity. And there are people that are beginning to, especially in the screenwriting world, talk about the fractal nature of story structure. And yet that line of thinking isn't very far advanced. We've got these different disciplines that are off on different branches that don't really interact very much. So let's see, Mike, you want to say something?
We don't have balance, and it takes
Yeah,
people.
Wait, is somebody talking there? Matthew?
Oh, yeah, I muted him.
Okay. Let's see. Mike, you want to say something?
yeah, and he muted me too. So
Yeah.
just as Liz was explaining this to me, I was I'm sorry, Liz, I did this. I was searching the internet as she was explaining it, and I came up with a thing on Faulkner. And Faulkner did get a Nobel Prize in literature, but he was famously difficult to understand, to the point that one interviewer asked him, "What do you say to someone who said they've read your book 3 times and they still don't understand it?" And his comment was, "Tell them to read it a 4th time." And I doubt anybody didn't know what a Crichton book was about after the first reading.
Yeah, exactly. As a matter of fact, that's what Mike Backus has talked about. And, Mike adapted 2 of his novels into screenplays. And he always said that the thing that people loved about Crichton was that reading his books made you feel smart. You didn't need to know the science, but as you read it, you felt like, wow, I really understand this stuff, precisely because he had such a good grasp of this basic dynamic of narrative structure for the broad audience.
When I read Crichton, the first Crichton book I read, Jurassic Park, I was in 5th grade, and some of the science was over my head, but it's so driven by action that I mean, I followed it completely. If you'd handed me Faulkner at that same age, I'd I'd have given up after about a paragraph, probably.
What about James Joyce? Yeah, other authors we could investigate. Dean, you want to say something?
Sure, I'll confess, like Mike, I was doing a bit of fussing while Liz was speaking. I am sorry. I just had to do this. I had to take a look at Moby Dick. Um, so nobody run the numbers. Just in your head, take some guesses as to what you think the and frequency and narrative index for Moby Dick would be. A book that is legendary for its
Okay,
opacity.
first off, do you have the numbers?
I do have the
Okay,
numbers.
interesting. Good.
Yes.
Very, very good. All right, good exercise here.
I adore that book, by the way,
Yeah.
but
All right, I will take a first few shots, which is that it has a lot of exposition to get up and running, right?
there's
Um,
a lot of exposition.
like
No kidding.
Man of La Mancha or Don Quixote, a lot of great books like that you have to wade through, and Dostoevsky's type things. Um, Wait, Mike,
There
you
are
didn't.
single sentences that run 500 words in that book. So yeah,
Geez,
just
Mike, you
saying.
didn't spill the beans there already, did you?
No, that's Mike's guess.
Oh,
That's a
that's his
guess.
guess. Okay, all right.
Like,
I thought he
yes.
had already searched it. Yeah, I would think that it would be 3.5 for the and frequency and possibly 20. I don't know. Well, I would wonder if there wouldn't be different parts of the book that would have different narrative index values. We've
There
talked about
could
this
be. I did
before.
not do it chapter by chapter, but
Yeah,
I will spill the beans here. So
no,
and
no, wait, wait,
frequency.
wait. Let's see if
Oh,
anybody
okay.
else got any more guesses. Anybody else want to take a shot? Um, Doug, you got any thoughts on Moby Dick?
Those who've read it.
Not really. Call me Ishmael. That's as much as I know.
All right, Leo is weighing in at 4.5 over 10. And by the way, that's another topic of discussion is which of the two numbers should we list first as if this is going to be the fingerprint. And I sort of suggested that we do NI
Yay,
first
Karen.
over AF, but I don't know. People's opinions. Matthew, you see some others in the chat?
Yeah, Liz is thinking around 12 for the narrative index. Oh, Mike,
4.5 and 12.
yeah, Mike, you're going all the way up to 17 for the narrative index. Oh, wow.
All right, any other guesses before we reveal and
Okay,
see who gets the
I think
prize?
we've had time to cogitate, but
Okay, all right. So let's
and
break the
frequency
suspense
is
here. D.
3.0. So just a bit above the 2.5, much
Yeah,
lower than I would have expected given the exposition.
yeah.
Narrative index, 28.
Wow.
Yeah,
Whoa.
That's really interesting.
totally
Maybe there's a
surprising.
reason that book has stuck around for a while. Huh.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah,
really interesting.
yeah. And that does include the extracts supplied by sub librarian section at the beginning, just so you know.
Now, here's another little thing to toss in there because in my Narrative is Everything book I did 6 years ago or so, um, I ran a whole bunch of different books in there, and three of Kurt Vonnegut's books. What would you guess for him for the narrative index for starters? Guesses for Kurt Vonnegut's narrative index. Hang on one second. I'll actually get the numbers here. Um, there it is. And anybody read any of Kurt Vonnegut's books? Oh, 25. Okay. Um, let's see. Anybody else? Dun, 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 dun. Where is this going to be? This table. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, back in here. And, um, bottom line is that he's right around 11 for all three books. Here it is. Let's see. We have got for Kurt Vonnegut, da 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 da. Breakfast of Champions, Sirens of Titan, Slaughterhouse Five, and they are 11, 11, and 10. And the and frequencies are 2.5, 2.4, and 2.8. I mean,
Interesting.
isn't that a pretty distinctive narrative fingerprint right there? Sample size of only three. I didn't do any more than that, but bingo. And if you're familiar with Kurt Vonnegut's writing, it's very dry and there's no suspense building at all. He makes
Yeah.
fun of makes fun of basically arc plot and all that sort of stuff. It's kind of parody almost. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
like Slaughterhouse-Five, that one was like almost purposefully like in your
Yes,
face non-linear, as non-linear as you could possibly make it.
exactly. Jumping all around the cosmos,
And
precisely.
so it goes, Karen, and so it goes.
Um, other authors to be speculated on. Eric, your insights. Dickens.
He's the other one I've had on my list to look at. So given how challenging he was for me to read as a kid. So
Hmm.
Well,
William
I've
Shakespeare.
been concentrating on Crichton, but I did Carl Sagan, and he was spot on in the green zone, as I once already reported here.
Yeah, I think I had Dragons of Eden in there, and exactly right that. I think he was probably in mid 20s or so for the narrative index.
Yes, yeah, and 2.5, like even chapter by chapter of Cosmos, each one of them was 2.5, basically.
Wow.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'd be curious what Malcolm Gladwell is because his books, I find them interesting, but easy to read, right? They flow really quick. So I don't know if it's because of the structure or not.
I think I got one of those here. Let's see, what did we have from Gladwell? Uh, 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 um,
Interesting. By request, I just ran the numbers on a book by a Dr. Randy Olson called The Narrative Gem for Medicine. Any
Danger.
guesses as to what we got for that one?
I'm guessing somewhere between 25 to 30 for the narrative index.
Interesting. Oh, you know what? So this one was on request from a Dr. Mike Strauss, but I'm not so sure we should trust these numbers because the words and but are being used,
Oh, that's a good point.
yeah,
Analytically. Yeah, right.
analytically so often.
Yeah, yeah.
So these are going to be skewed all to heck.
That's very true. Let's see. Malcolm Gladwell's The Tipping Point was narrative index of 16 and frequency of 2.6. And, that sort of proximity to 2.5 also reflects professional editors that have gotten in there and they've further honed this thing. And they don't even know they do it, but a well-trained brain for editing naturally carves these things down to 2.5. And nobody studied that. How exactly does that happen? It's such a large scale holistic process. And, big time editors like that. The one I worked with for Houston, we have a narrative from University of Chicago Press. They gave me their best editor, over the years. And I talked with her about this, and she just thought this was all silly, but to and ratio and all these things. She didn't have the first thought about the words but and and. She just edits books by her gut feel, basically. And as I say, I promise you, this is a discipline that will get more and more quantified over the next few years.
Barb
Randy?
Bigford, you had a question for Eric and Liz?
Yeah, and Eric answered it. I'm just curious what kind of response you expect when you give your poster.
Well, I don't,
That's a really good question. Yes, right. Confusion.
well, we haven't done anything like this before on this topic and with this matter, so I don't have any particular expectation, but I'm really curious as you are about that. We'll see. I mean, as I said in my written answer, it's a faculty showcase, so we will have people from all departments and students. So we'll see. Maybe there's also some significant difference between the two demographics on how they react.
Yeah, yeah. That's really interesting. Shirley, you got a thought for us?
I have a question for you, and that is, has anybody looked at um, looked at these metrics in terms of women versus men and other ethnicities? Because there are other people who actually have much stronger narrative um, um, communities have much stronger they're surrounded much more by narrative. So has anybody actually looked beyond white males?
Um, sort of, I mean, the starting point for that is Christopher Vogler's second edition of his book, The Writer's Journey. And we use this in the course a lot. Has this brilliant 14-page preface he wrote to the second edition. And in there, the writer's journey is all about the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell, as he sketched it out. And the ABT is really just the most condensed version of the hero's journey. And in Vogler's preface, he talks about the 10 years since he published the first edition of it. And it's kind of the Bible for Hollywood screenwriters and Hollywood storytellers, the writer's journey that's now, I think, in its fifth edition. And he tells about the 10 years that he spent as soon as it got published. The origin of that book, The Writer's Journey, was that George Lucas made Star Wars using the principles of Joseph Campbell. Nobody knew that, but Christopher Vogler figured it out. He was working at Disney and he wrote this internal memo, 17-page memo that became legendary. And in the late 80s, it began to be circulated around Hollywood. And it was kind of like this secret little playbook, code book of why Star Wars was appealing around the world. There was something magical going on there. And what was magical was that Lucas understood these basic principles that Joseph Campbell had identified. So the Vogler's book explained that in great detail. And then it took off immediately, and he spent 10 years going around the world talking about it. And then at the beginning of the second edition, he wrote this 14-page preface in which he summarized, here's some of the pushback that I got on this. And there's a section in there about the female version of the writer's or the hero's journey and the critique and commentary on that. And so there are some stylistic differences, and I think that it matches to some extent this, that I think that it tends to go more in the direction of greater exposition and more towards mini plot, or the analytical terms that McKee uses, and less this more simplified formulaic pattern of arc plot. And this is why these two things are so important, ABT and. They underpin large scale patterns of communication and storytelling and all these sorts of things throughout society.
Well, I,
Yep.
I just so that you know, I don't know if you knew that I know George Lucas and I went to Skywalker Ranch. And when
Aha.
you walk in the door at of the main house, which is the office, you see all of this Joseph Campbell stuff. I mean, this is like everywhere. It is kind of steeped into the foundation, as
Hmm.
it were, of the place. So that does not surprise me. And the fact that George talks about his own story, which was that he was a terrible student and that he just did not enjoy um, school at all until he kind of discovered this other thing. And that other thing is what kind of wrapped him um, in the possibilities that storytelling was a powerful way to teach. And this was, um, like, I get this, but the point is that was what George grabbed onto, but there are a lot of us who grab onto other things. And so the question is, have we paid any attention to what these others, to what it's like, what does a heart attack look like in a man versus a woman? All right. And it's different. And so the question then becomes, how is this kind of sense actually displayed in somebody else? I saw Mike Strauss talking about Barbara Jordan, who is basically a powerhouse.
Okay, let me, not to get too nerdy here, but why not for a moment, since you brought it up, let me read you a couple paragraphs from Vogler's preface to the second edition where he addresses this. The section is titled Gender Problems. The hero's journey is sometimes critiqued as a masculine theory cooked up by men to enforce their dominance and with little relevance to the unique and quite different journey of womanhood. There may be some masculine bias built into the description of the hero cycle since many of the theoreticians have been male, and I freely admit it, I am a man and can't help seeing but see the world through the filter of my gender. Yet I have tried to acknowledge and explore the ways in which the woman's journey is different from the man's. I believe that much of the journey is the same for all humans since we share many realities of birth, growth, and decay. But clearly, being a woman imposes distinct cycles, rhythms, pressures, and needs. There may be a real difference in the form of men's and women's journeys. Men's journeys may be, in some sense, more linear, proceeding from one outward goal to the next, while women's journeys may spin or spiral inward and outward. Spiral may be a more accurate analog for the woman's journey than a straight line or simple circle. Another possible model might be a series of concentric rings, with the woman making a journey inward towards the center and then expanding out again. The masculine need to go out and overcome obstacles to achieve, conquer, and possess may be replaced in the woman's journey by the drives to preserve the family and the species, make a home, grapple with emotions, come to accord, or cultivate beauty. Last paragraph here. Good work has been done by women to articulate these differences, and I recommend books such as Merlin Stone's When God Was a Woman, Clarissa Pincola's Women Who Run with the Wolves, Jean Shinoda Boland's Goddesses in Every Woman, Maureen Murdoch's The Heroine's Journey, and Woman's Dictionary of Myth and Symbols as starting points for a more balanced understanding of the male and female perspectives of the hero's journey. Note to men, if in doubt on this point, consult the nearest woman. There you go.
No, I just wanted us to not get so deep into that before
Yeah.
without considering that there may be this other thing.
Oh, yeah.
And because the experiences are different and
Oh,
the demands and responsibilities are different
I've
and the
had this
role
experience
within the
twice.
species is different.
I've had this experience twice in public of giving a talk at University of Central Florida and another one in Anchorage. I think it was the Fish and Wildlife folks, and having a woman in the Q&A tear into me about everything you've said is all about men, yada, yada. And that's sort of what he's saying is the constraint is that most of the theory has arisen from males, and that's the body of literature you have to work with to begin with. And then there are other books like that. And as he says, there definitely are some differences. The question is, are those differences greater than the commonalities? And in fact,
That's true.
and when you look at Campbell's foundational work, The Hero of the Thousand Faces, there's a line from his first chapter that I quote endlessly in there, which he says, there are, of course, endless differences in storytelling between all the different religions and cultures around the world. But this isn't a book about the differences. This is a book about the similarities. And it's through similarities that we build a body of knowledge. You could sit there and marvel at all the differences for the rest of time. But if you really want to try and get some understanding, it really begins by looking at similarities. That comes out of evolutionary biology, where it all begins with shared derived characters, not by marveling at how everything's different from everything else.
You're
So yeah,
absolutely
that's
right, but and there is a but,
no, oh, where are you drawing that from? Okay.
and that is that given the context, some situations are more adaptive. They are adaptively important. And I think that part of the polarization that we are seeing right now is because we have people who are very linear and they are either on one end of the line or the other end of the line. And there are many of us who aren't on a line. We don't
Well,
do line.
okay, to bring this full circle to the opening stuff that I ran through.
That was a good one.
Oh, no, that was a very good one. And relevant to that, that was a lot of what the commentators were talking about last night. Interestingly, was that Mondami has run this campaign that has been all about inclusiveness, and part of his speech last night was about inclusiveness. But that was a pretty fierce and mean and pretty biting, cutting ABT speech that he gave. It wasn't a kumbaya, let's all get along. It was throwing down the gauntlet at Trump directly. And that's a lot more ABT dynamics there. And I think you could probably dive into his speech and see different parts were more ABT-ish than
Yeah,
others.
but he's not trying to get along with this guy because the guy isn't trying to get along with him. Okay,
No, precisely.
the point is, what is the dialogue like in the middle? That's to me the most important thing politically.
But I think a
What
lot of the
is the
point of last night was that Gavin Newsom followed up with 100% combative. And this is no longer the let's collaborate Democrats. This is now they're making decisions of let's give up on the bipartisan collaboration thing for the time being and let's dive in. And they're getting more focused. And that's why that no kings thing, there are all these symptoms of they're getting a bit more ABT, I think, in their thinking and approach. Doug, what do you think? You agree with that thought?
I do. I mean, I'm really thinking about, well, it was really thinking about when Dr. Malcolm's talking about this. I'm thinking about autism because the most underdiagnosed populations are women, girls, and African Americans. And it's really the fundamental tension of there's the whole, this conflict. And the big but right now is about white Christian nationalism, that this is our country and everybody else doesn't need to be seen and their stories don't need to be heard. And we don't want DEI and we don't want people like Mondami lead in positions of leadership because this place is ours. And, once we realize that that's the fundamental tension, um, I don't know how we convince people that other people's stories matter and need to be heard. But that's the problem. I think that's what you're speaking to. I think
Well,
that's
but
what we're talking
my
about.
my feeling, my concern is that what's missing from all of that analysis is that we live in a world of too much information now, and a
oh,
lot of these
you
ideas.
live in a world that does not have adequate information. They have a
No,
lot of
but
stuff.
the communication environment has changed in the last 10 to 15
Yeah.
years, and it's accelerated and it's amplified with the sheer volume of information. And the what I've talked a lot about is narrative selection. There's a different pattern of selection going on now, and it's selecting for different styles that are very contradiction rich. This is where the ABT becomes powerful in trying to understand at a simple elemental level of what's going on. Social media selects for that center element of the ABT. It selects for the contradiction. I talked about that in the Houston book, that as soon as they came along with Twitter with 140 characters, it only had enough space for one of the three things, contradiction, and big surprise. All of a sudden, all the social media turned out to be driven just not by context or by consequence, just by contradiction. And that's where it sits now. And unfortunately, all of these, this becomes really, it integrates with last week's discussion we had about indigenous people, which is they have stories to tell, but if they don't tell them fast enough, they're not going to get out there in today's world, sadly. I don't know what the answer to that is, but I know we've got these things that have happened, technology's driven them, and it's selecting against modes of communication. And one little anecdote that I meant to toss in last week was the talk I gave in Fiji years ago to the World Wildlife Fund group, but they had all these different groups that were involved there in different causes in Fiji. And one woman from, I think it was World Wildlife Fund, talked about it. She said, I go to these traditional cultural evenings that they have out there in the middle of nowhere, and all the Fijians get together and they drink the kava and they sit around and do their storytelling stuff. And she said, I fall asleep 6, 7, 8 times during the evening because their quote stories go on and on and on and on, and you can't follow them. And that's their traditional way of their communication. But that gets selected against in a world of technology that's so fast driving. And that's, I think, what they were wrestling with last week a bit in that whole discussion about Ecuador and trying to work with
Well, there is a bigger problem,
yeah.
and that is poor listening.
Yeah, in a world of too much information.
I thought you were gonna say poor education, because I think
Well,
fundamentally that is how you
poor
understand
education is
what's
one
right.
thing, but poor listening goes across the spectrum, beyond the time you would be in school, in college, et cetera, et cetera. There is so much poor listening that is going on.
Yeah,
Mm.
not easy. Matthew, we're at the final 4-minute warning. Got any crucial comments in the chat window that
Poor
need to be?
Dean, you had your hand up ages ago. Did you still have something you wanted to add?
No, I'm going to blow the one important thing concept here because I have three things I just want to say real fast. One is a message to Randy, which I am now kind of curious about this whole thing with editors are editing towards these numerical targets, even though they don't realize they are. I think
Yeah.
a pretty quick and interesting way of looking at that would be to find some cooperative editors and get them to give you the author's first draft and their last draft. What did they do numerically through
Yes,
that time?
yes, yes.
I think you could look at that pretty easily.
Well, and
That's
to
right.
that very point, if you take a look at the two books from Lee Harper, To Kill a Mockingbird,
Mm,
the classic, and then the one that was discovered after she died, Go Set a Watchman, it matches exactly what you predict, which was, and they debated for a year or two, was this the sequel? What was this thing? Was it a completely different book? And eventually all the experts converged on the consensus that it was the precursor to, and it was an early draft of
right.
To Kill a Mockingbird, and then it follows exactly. It's got a much higher and frequency and a much lower narrative index than the classic. So yeah,
Yeah.
keep going.
Uh,
Second point.
The other thing, yeah, as we were talking about Hero's Journey earlier, I was reminded that John Steinbeck hung out with Joseph Campbell a lot, like physically. Like they were
Yes.
buddies. And
Yes.
I'm curious as to whether there's much Hero's Journey in Steinbeck's writing. And I have to do I'm not a scholar. I've read almost no Steinbeck, so I don't know. So I'm curious about that. And I'm not talking narrative index specifically here, but Hero's Journey type arc. Did he internalize that? I don't know. The other thing is that, yeah, the stuff with Joseph Campbell and George Lucas, I'm pointing towards the George Lucas Museum, which is about to open up right next door to us here in Los Angeles about a year from now-ish. I am imagining a huge amount of that material will be there because it is the Museum of the Narrative Arts. That's the name of the museum. So I think we'll be
Yeah.
seeing a lot of that. And finally, Shirley versus, was it Doug?
No,
I
Shirley
think
and
there's
Doug actually agree.
yeah, but and that's I think you guys were debating, is it a difference between poor listening or poor education? I think those are somewhat the same thing because to me the real goal of education is to turn you into a good, productive, critical listener who can listen to facts and arguments and think about them productively. So I think that's almost saying the same thing. Yes, I
Yeah,
think you guys
I
agree.
just wanted not to jump on the education piece because that's such a convenient scapegoat.
It's its
All
own
right.
box. Yeah, it's got its
And
own world. Yeah.
because the kind of formal role of education, as it were, is in a confined period of one's life. It tends to be,
Yes.
right? Listening is broader than that. It is throughout, and it includes and would bring in the adults, the policymakers, the industry people, all of those people who would say, no, I'm not in an education environment. But the question is, do they hear the things around them? Do they hear the other voices?
And I will do a name drop to finish on with the Steinbeck question, which is for 20 years I was buddies with Tom Steinbeck, his son, and listened to tons and tons of stories, spent a lot of drunken nights with him. And basically, Joseph Campbell was buddies with Ed Ricketts, the marine biologist who was Steinbeck's best buddy, his lifelong inspiration. And that's where Joseph Campbell spent time. In fact, there was one summer, I think in the late 30s, that he spent the whole summer in Ricketts' lab in Pacific Grove. So they were soulmates, the two of them. And Steinbeck was, he just had a deep, visceral narrative intuition for storytelling and alcohol. And those are the stories that I've listened to from Tom. And he wasn't very analytical. And the ultimate demonstration as the log from the Sea of Cortez, where he and Ricketts took that 6-week trip down to Sea of Cortez and agreed to keep separate journals. They would trade at the end of the trip and they would write books incorporating the other guy's work. And Tom told me all that John did was drink the whole time because his marriage was falling apart with his first wife, and he didn't even write anything in his journal. And when they came back, he took Ricketts' journal and used that for chapter 11 in the Log from the Sea of Cortez. It's very suddenly analytical and didn't really acknowledge him. So yeah, no, the Campbell connection was more through Ed Ricketts and less through John, really at any, I think, analytical level, as far as I can tell, because I've had those conversations with Tom. But all very, very interesting. And that's the question, is whether forensically, analytically, people can go back into some of this stuff someday with these metrics and see some almost forensics. You can see a little bit of what was going on possibly with them. That's our thinking with it. But those are all thoughts for you, Eric, for what you do next week with the poster. And actually, we'll be fascinated to hear back from you how it went. So this is a great session to kind of get you prepped. Thanks everybody for all the brainstorming on this. And
Thank you.
yeah,
Thank you.
tons of fun. And yeah, let's everybody take off. And Leo, you want to just stick around? We can chit chat here. Yeah, why not? We're already on this link. So adios,
Everybody,
everybody.
adios.
Thanks. See you next week. Cool. Um, bing, bing.
Okay, Randy Olson, how was the rest of your